the microphone continues, so I'm over here today until we can get a new microphone that maybe will behave itself. On a Friday morning in January, in the middle of rush hour, a man emerged from the Metro subway at L'Enfant Plaza station in Washington, D.C. He was nondescript, a 30-something white guy in old blue jeans and a long-sleeve t-shirt, wearing a baseball cap. Now, as metro stations go, L'Enfant Plaza is nondescript too. Even before you arrive, most of the subway conductors can't even pronounce the name of it right. L'Enfant, Elfant, Lefant. At the top of the escalators as you come out, there's a shoe shine stand and a busy kiosk that sells newspapers, lottery tickets, and dirty magazines. The young man coming out of the subway on that January morning positioned himself up against a wall beside a trash can. And then, from a small case that he was carrying, he removed an old violin. Placing the open case at his feet, he tossed in a few dollars and some change as seed money, spun it around to face all the people that were walking past, and began to play. During the next 43 minutes, as he performed 6 classical pieces, 1,097 people passed him by. Almost all of them were on their way to work because of where the subway station is located next to government offices. They were following their ordinary routine on just another ordinary day. So on that January morning, during rush hour in a DC subway station, what do you think happened? At first glance, it would be fair to say that not much happened at all. Though the young violinist played with acrobatic enthusiasm, his body was leaning into the music and he would stand up on his tiptoes when he hit the high notes. And the sound was nearly symphonic. It turns out that the acoustics in a subway station are really good for a violin concert. But it seemed like nothing much happened at all. The first 3 minutes that he was playing, 63 people walked by, and not one of them even seemed to notice he was there. Then, at the 3-minute mark, a middle-aged man slowed down his pace for just a split second, turned his head to look at the musician, and kept right on walking. 30 seconds later, he got his first donation from a woman who tossed a dollar bill in but then scooted right away. It wasn't until he'd been playing for 6 minutes that someone actually stopped, stood still, and listened to him. In the 3/4 of an hour that this subway violinist played, a grand total of 7 adults stopped what they were doing to hang around and listen for 1 minute or more. 20 other people actually gave him some money, but they didn't stop. And when his concert was over, he pulled the case back to himself and counted up what he'd made, and it came to $32.17. The people who stopped to listen or give him money that day, there doesn't seem to be a pattern to who they were. There were whites and blacks and Asians and men and women among those who did stop, and there were whites and blacks and Asians and men and women among all those who didn't. But there was a behavior of one group that was absolutely consistent across all 43 minutes. Every single time a child walked past, he or she tried to stop and watch and listen until their parent scooted them away. If only 27 adults stopped to listen or give money, that means 1,070 people hurried by, oblivious, many less than 3 feet away, few even turning to look. There was never a crowd for this concert, not even for a second. Now compare that to what happened in another city, miles away in Boston, at Symphony Hall, when virtuoso violinist Joshua Bell, who's also a 30-something white guy, and really cute, but he's a 30-something white guy. He wasn't wearing jeans and a ball cap, though. He had on black tuxedo pants and this black flowing silk shirt. And he played to a sold-out crowd who paid a lot of money for their tickets. The cheapest seats in the house were $100. That's because Joshua Bell is considered one of the world's most talented violin players alive today. He's been described by some as someone who plays like a god. An Interview magazine once wrote about him that, quote, his playing does nothing less than tell human beings why they bother to live. It probably helps, I think, that Joshua Bell always plays his concerts on a violin that was made in 1713 by Antonio Stradivari. And Joshua paid $3.5 million for that violin of his. So we have a tale of two violinists. One receives standing ovations. The other stands next to a wall by a trash can. One plays to sold-out crowds around the world and makes about $1,000 a minute when he plays, so he can afford to pay millions of dollars for that fancy violin. The other one, well, he attracts a crowd of 7, and he earns $32.17. And yes, some people threw pennies in. $32.17 for playing his subway concert on an old violin that was so worn that there was actually a spot of bare wood on the back of it where the varnish had come completely off. But you know what? It's not a tale of two violinists. It's a tale of one. Because the figure standing next to the wall by the trash can outside that DC Metro station was Joshua Bell. And the fiddle that he was playing was his 1713 Stradivarius. You see, just 3 days after he finished that concert in Boston, he came to DC, where in a few days more he was going to play to another standing room only crowd, and he agreed to help some Washington Post reporters with a little experiment. They said it was an experiment in context, perception, and priorities, to see if in an ordinary setting at an inconvenient time, in their words, beauty would transcend. So Joshua Bell, who plays like a god and whose performances tell us why we bother to live at all, he was descending into a DC Metro subway station that morning wearing blue jeans and a t-shirt and his baseball cap, and he set up shop next to that trash can and played a 43-minute concert on a Stradivarius violin, just to see how rush hour crowds would respond. What did the outcome of this little experiment of theirs reveal about the differences in his performances? It was the same musician playing the same music on the same instrument. And it turns out the experiment didn't reveal anything at all about his performances. They actually had hidden cameras videotaping. You can watch it on YouTube if you feel like it. And he played just as beautifully and just as perfectly in both settings. What the experiment did reveal a lot about was the people who listened, or who didn't listen, to him play. Why did that crowd in Boston just 3 days before sit in rapt attention on the edge of their $100 plus seats as they listened to him play and then jump to their feet and give him a standing ovation the minute he was done, while most of those people in the subway station rushed past him, often without even noticing there was a world-renowned violinist playing just inches away from them? It had nothing to do with one group being more sophisticated or more intelligent or more observant. The two different responses have everything to do with what people were expecting to see and hear in each of those two places: a luxurious concert hall or a grimy subway station. Each group looked in the usual place for what they expected to see, and guess what? They saw it. People who paid $100 or more to go to a luxurious concert hall in Boston expected to see a virtuoso play Stradivarius violin, and that's exactly what they saw. People in the subway weren't expecting to hear anything except the usual squeaks and rattles and whoosh of the metro as it delivered them to just another ordinary workday in their mid-level government jobs. So they found what they expected to find. Nothing out of the ordinary in the bustle and rush of another commute to the office. But they missed a chance of a lifetime to hear the world's best violinist play a free concert just for them. They walked right by. Missing what's right in front of you because it isn't what you're expecting to see is actually the theme of today's gospel lesson. Remember last week, we met John the Baptist at the top of his game. I mean, he was weird, but he was at the top of his game. He had camel skins on, and he was eating those locusts that were dipped in honey, and he was yelling at people to repent, and they were flocking to him to be baptized. This week, he is not at the top of his game. He's at one of the darkest moments of his life in a really dank, horrible underground prison cell. Now, even from within this prison cell, and maybe before he got there, John has started to hear what Jesus has been up to out in the world. Jesus, whom he said last week to us was going to come with unquenchable fire and a winnowing fork, who was probably going to have an army with him, because that's what everyone expected the Messiah to have. And he kicked those Roman occupiers out and reclaimed Jerusalem for the people of God, and it would be a Messiah that John could be proud of. But John has heard what Jesus has been up to. And it isn't what he expected a Messiah to do at all. He's so confused that he gets someone to deliver a message to Jesus, asking, "Are you the one that we're supposed to be waiting for, or should we wait for another one?" John's beginning to have his doubts because he didn't see what he expected to see. Jesus answers him, "You hear and see that the blind receive their sight, the lame walk, lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, the poor are having good news preached to them." None of that is what John the Baptist was expecting his Messiah to spend his time doing. The people that Jesus is hanging out with and seems completely preoccupied with are not the movers and shakers in Jerusalem. They are the lame and the blind. They are social outcasts and economic losers who can barely fend for themselves. So John begins to doubt. And Jesus answers him, "You're expecting the wrong things. You're looking in the wrong places. So you are missing the Messiah who is standing right in front of you." 30 years earlier, in Bethlehem, when Jesus was born, I imagine that most of those who took a look around that city that night would probably have told you and I that nothing much happened at all. There were crowds rushing past, trying to get to that census taker's office before they closed, trying to find a hotel room before they were all sold out. And if someone did go looking for something momentous to happen, I guarantee you they would not have gone looking in the alley behind an inn where people's animals were stabled. And even if they had looked there, I don't think they would have looked in the feed trough or at that peasant couple huddled in the corner, that young bride who had just given birth in a barn, how humiliating, and her much older husband, roll the eyes, both covered in dust from the road, both wearing country bumpkin outfits and speaking with backwater accents. They are not what you would expect to find if you went looking for the news story. The news story so big that it was going to change the world forever. Because nobody except Mary and God, and maybe Joseph, if you like Matthew as your gospel, expected, none of them expected, that a baby in swaddling clothes, lying in a manger in Bethlehem of all places, would grow up to be the Messiah. Like a God, that he would grow up to tell human beings why they bother to live. No one expected Christmas in the barn. But you and I, we are called to become the kind of people who look for God in unexpected places. Not just at Christmas when we head out to the barn to welcome the Christ child, but all year long. We're called to be like the 7 people who did stop in the subway that morning in D.C., not like the 1,070 who didn't. And we're called to be like the children in that subway station, right? Every one of them knew they were witnessing something beautiful and extraordinary in a very ordinary place. We are called to ask, I think, in the words of that popular Christmas song that I just found out was written in October of 1962 as a response to the Cuban Missile Crisis. Do you see what I see? Do you hear? I can't sing, so I can't sing it for you. You know the song, right? Do you see what I see? Do you hear what I hear? Do you know what I know? A child shivers in the cold. Let us bring him silver and gold. The child sleeping in the night, he will bring us goodness and light. Let us pray. Gracious God, you have promised that the Word will become flesh and dwell among us. Help us to let go of our assumptions so that we might open our hearts and minds and souls to receive you in the most unlikely and unexpected places. Give us eyes to see your presence in our world and in our lives, so that through ordinary people like us, your kingdom might draw near. Amen. Our sermon hymn is number 843.